The last time anyone saw her was near the cliffs. What her sister found changed everything. The last time anyone saw Elise Hart, she was standing at the edge of Blackthorn Cliffs with her two daughters, one hand gripping each of theirs, staring out into the fog like she was waiting for something to rise from the sea. 3 weeks later, a drone's shaky footage surfaced, filmed by accident, never meant to be seen. And in a single frame, Marion Rowe caught sight of a lavender jacket and a child's terrified face peering out from an old storm shelter no one had used in decades. Her heart knew before her mind could catch up. The girls were alive, but her brother Jonah was nowhere in sight. And something about Elise's expression in that footage, the stillness, the calculation, felt colder than the tide pooling beneath the cliffs. Marion had survived riptides and shipwrecks, but what waited inside that shelter was a storm she'd never trained for. And this time, she might be the only one left to face it. The wind screamed up from the Pacific, slamming into the cliffside with enough force to rattle the loose panes in Marion Rowe's kitchen windows. She barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the paused frame on her laptop. A still image pulled from amateur drone footage posted the night before by a local vlogger who specialized in haunted coastlines and forgotten towns. The drone had skimmed along the jagged edges of Blackthorn Cliffs, a remote stretch of Oregon's coast infamous for shipwrecks, sudden rock slides, and fog so thick it felt alive. It wasn't the cliffs that had made Marion's breath catch. It was what the drone happened to catch, for just 3 seconds, as it drifted past an outcropping known to only a handful of locals. An old storm shelter from the 1960s, built into the side of a rock face and long thought abandoned. And through its salt-crusted window, Marion had seen a child. Not just any child. A little girl in a lavender windbreaker with dark, tangled curls and a familiar narrow face. The face of her niece, Calla Hart. Her breath had left her lungs so fast, she'd almost blacked out. Now, 24 hours later, she was packed and pacing, trying to ignore the voice in her head that sounded too much like her mother's. "You're 48, Marion. Not invincible. Not a hero." But her mother had also said, more than once, "You've got the stubborn blood. You'd swim into a riptide if it meant saving someone else." And she would. She had. That's what made her a legend in her Coast Guard unit before she retired. But this wasn't the open sea. This was family. 3 weeks ago, Jonah had texted her a picture. Him, Elise and the twins, Calla in lavender, Maisie in that ridiculous yellow raincoat she refused to take off even in summer, all smiling in front of their coastal tent setup, the ocean glittering behind them. A family camping trip before school started. "Come join us, sis," Jonah had written. "One more Rowe family fire pit night. I'll bring the marshmallows, you bring the ghost stories." She hadn't gone. She was tied up that week, volunteering for a local search and rescue training course, and she hadn't thought much of it when Jonah's replies stopped coming. Spotty signal, she'd assumed. Elise always hated how he overtexted anyway. It wasn't until 3 days passed with silence, and then 5, that she drove to the trailhead. The tent was still there, empty, half collapsed, their gear gone, no footprints left in the sand, only a sun-faded copy of The Wind in the Willows and Calla's stuffed sea otter, wet and bloated from the tide. The sheriff's department had launched a search. Boats, drones, dogs, nothing. They'd called it an accident. They must have tried to hike the coast and gotten caught by the tide. Happens more than you'd think, Miss Rowe. Sad, but not unusual. But Marion knew her brother. Jonah had grown up clinging to the rocks at low tide, memorizing current maps, building driftwood shelters just for fun. He wouldn't have taken his family into danger unprepared. He wouldn't have disappeared without a trace. Now she was sure of it. She downloaded the drone footage, enhanced the frame, and sent it to every contact she still had in SAR Command. She'd gotten nothing but voicemail, half-assured concern, and the same tired line. "We need more than blurry footage." She had something better. Instinct, and a GPS pin. The vlogger had tagged the drone's flight path. Marion had overlaid it with her own maps. The shelter was just north of the Split-Tooth Inlet, about 6 miles from the nearest maintained trail. She zipped her waterproof bag shut, checking and rechecking each compartment. Satellite phone, backup charger, first aid kit, folding stretcher, protein packs, marine flare. As she stepped out onto her porch, the wind hit her like a slap, salt sting sharp and ice cold. The ocean roared below the cliffs, its voice thunderous and eternal. Somewhere out there were answers, or bodies, and she didn't intend to come back without one or the other. Her boots crunched over gravel as she made her way toward her battered Subaru. Before she could open the driver's door, a voice called out from behind the gate. "You're really going out there?" Marion turned to see Ben Foster leaning on his rusting pickup. He looked older than she remembered, hair going to silver around the edges, face deeply tanned, sleeves rolled up despite the chill. "I saw your car packed yesterday," he said, eyeing the bag slung over her shoulder. "Then I saw the video." "Did you?" Marion's voice was guarded. "I know where that shelter is. Helped repair the roof after a landslide last year." He kicked at the ground. "You're not going to make it there before sundown, unless you take the coast route, and the tide's rising." "Then I'll go fast." Ben exhaled sharply. "Damn it, Marion. At least let me come with you." She hesitated. Of all the people in town, Ben had been the least involved since the search. No flyers, no donation to the rescue fund. And now he wanted in? "Why?" she asked. "Because I should have said something weeks ago." His jaw clenched. "And because I think I know what happened to your brother." That stopped her. The wind howled between them. "Get in," she said finally. "But if you're lying to me, or holding anything back." "I'm not," he said. "Not anymore." Marion started the engine, the tires crunching toward the road that wound north, hugging the cliffs like a warning, as though fog curled in through the trees like fingers. Somewhere out there, her nieces were alive. Somewhere, Elise was waiting. And something told Marion, the storm hadn't even begun. By the time Marion and Ben reached the makeshift trailhead, the sun had already begun to vanish into the gray haze of the incoming fog. The last signs of daylight smeared the horizon in orange and ash blue, the ocean below surging with frothy violence. The wind carried the scent of seaweed, salt, and something metallic Marion couldn't quite place. She stepped out of the car, eyes sweeping the terrain ahead. Scrubby coastal brush giving way to narrow switchbacks carved into the cliffside. There was no trail marker, no signs, just memory and instinct. Ben closed the truck door gently, like slamming it might spook the world into shifting. "This way," he said, nodding toward a narrow opening between two wind-blasted pine trees. "We've got about 4 miles to cover. Terrain's not friendly." "Neither am I," Marion muttered, adjusting the strap on her pack. They walked in silence at first. The ground was damp, soft in some places, slick with moss in others. The fog grew thicker with every 100 yards, curling around their ankles, clinging to branches. The ocean murmured somewhere below, but its rhythm was broken, not the steady crash of waves, but the unpredictable churn of an incoming swell. "Why now, Ben?" Marion asked finally. Her voice was low, but it carried. "Why'd you wait 3 damn weeks?" Ben didn't answer right away. He moved carefully along the path, his steps deliberate, eyes on the rocks ahead. "Because I didn't believe what I saw," he said at last. "Or maybe I didn't want to believe it." Marion stopped walking. "Believe what?" Ben turned, his face half hidden in the fog. "That Elise wasn't a victim." Marion's breath caught. "You saw her?" "I was down near Split Tooth Inlet a few days after the storm," he said, "looking for driftwood salvage. The whole beach was shredded. Pieces of tents, backpacks, even some shoes. But there was no panic in her face, no grief. She was just standing there, watching the tide come in." Marion's fists clenched. "And you didn't report that?" Ben shook his head. "Didn't have proof. And by the time I circled back, she was gone. I told myself I imagined it, that I'd seen someone else." Marion resumed walking, her boots crunching over loose stone. "And now?" "Now I know I didn't," he said quietly. "That video you showed me, it wasn't just a coincidence. That shelter, it's not on any public map. Only a few people even know it's there. She didn't find it by accident." Marion's mind spun. Elise had always been a mystery, poised, gracious, but tightly wound. Jonah had once called her a mirror with no reflection. Beautiful, but hard to read. Marion had tried to welcome her into the family, but there had always been distance. And now, pieces of a darker truth were beginning to emerge like driftwood after a storm. They crested a ridge, and the land dropped sharply on the other side, revealing a jagged outcropping of black rock that jutted into the sea like a broken tooth. Somewhere below that bluff, hidden in the cliffs, was the shelter. Marion stopped and squinted through the fog. "You sure it's this way?" Ben nodded. "There's a path carved into the southern edge, slippery as hell. Used to be part of an old ranger route before erosion shut it down. The shelter's tucked beneath the overhang. Used as an emergency bunkhouse back in the 60s during lighthouse ops. No one goes there now." They began the descent, slow and treacherous. The slope was sharp, and one misstep could send them tumbling into the jagged tide pools below. Marion's hands found purchase on outcroppings slick with mist. Each step was deliberate, fueled by resolve. Halfway down, she froze. There, half buried under loose gravel, was a tiny footprint, too small for an adult. The tread was faded but clear. A child had been here. She crouched, brushing aside debris. "Maisie or Calla," she whispered. Ben looked over her shoulder. No mistaking it. Marion's pulse thundered. They were close. The path narrowed, curving along the cliffside. Up ahead, the land opened to a small flat ledge barely visible through the mist. And then, there it was, the shelter. Built directly into the rock, the door was rusted metal with a faded red cross spray painted over it. The single window was grime-covered, but Marion could make out movement inside. The flutter of fabric, the suggestion of shadows. She stepped forward and knocked once. Silence. She knocked again, louder. "Elise, it's Marion. I know you're in there. Open the door." More silence. Then, the creak of metal. The door unlatched from within. It opened just an inch, enough for a single blue eye to peer out. Elise's face, pale and drawn, appeared in the narrow gap. Her lips parted in surprise. "Marion?" Marion's breath hitched. "Where are the girls?" "They're inside," Elise said, her voice hoarse. "They're safe." "Then let me see them," Marion demanded. Elise hesitated, then slowly pulled the door open. The interior was dim, lit by a single lantern. The air was stale but warm, scented with canned soup and wet clothing. Against the far wall, Calla sat cross-legged with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her face ghost pale. Beside her, Maisie clutched a stuffed sea otter, eyes wide and unblinking. "Elise," Marion said carefully. "What happened to Jonah?" A flicker of something passed across Elise's face. Grief, guilt, or calculation. "It was an accident," she whispered. He slipped." Marion took a step forward. "You expect me to believe that?" "I don't care what you believe," Elise snapped, her composure cracking. "I did what I had to do to keep the girls alive." Ben appeared in the doorway, his presence causing Elise to recoil slightly. "You're not alone this time," he said. Something shifted in Elise's expression. Her eyes darted toward a heater in the corner, wires leading to a sealed propane tank. A quiet, terrible realization dawned. "Elise," Marion said, her voice low and steady. "What did you rig that for?" But Elise only smiled. The kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. "I told you," she said. "I kept them alive." Then she turned and ran deeper into the shelter. Marion lunged after her, and behind them, the flame on the heater flickered with sudden life. Marion didn't think. She moved on instinct. Years of muscle memory from rescue drills and life-or-death decisions crashing back like a wave. Her boots slammed against the concrete floor as she lunged across the shelter toward the heater. The flame was flickering too high, dancing like it had caught a draft. Propane, wires, pressure building. Her gut screamed what her mind hadn't had time to process. This was a trap. "Elise," she roared. But Elise had already disappeared behind the back curtain, into the storeroom or whatever that rust-streaked corner of the shelter had been converted into. "Ben," Marion snapped without looking. "Get the girls out, now." Ben, wide-eyed but responsive, crossed the room in 2 strides. "Come on, sweethearts," he said urgently, his voice calm but firm. "We're going outside now. Right now." Calla stood stiffly, her eyes glued to Marion. Maisie hesitated, clutching her stuffed otter. "It's okay," Marion said, catching their gaze. "I'll be right behind you. Go." Ben gathered them quickly, shielding their faces from the gust of cold air as he opened the shelter door and ushered them out into the fog. As soon as they were gone, Marion turned back to the heater. The flame was climbing higher, licking toward the metal vent overhead. Someone, Elise, had sealed it. There was no airflow, no release. It was just a matter of time before the gas ignited everything. Marion dropped to her knees and ripped the wires free from the ignition system. The click-pop stopped, but the gas was still leaking. She spun the valve closed, wincing as the metal burned her palm from how long it had been on. The flame sputtered, then died. Silence. For a breathless second, Marion stayed still, chest heaving, staring at the extinguished heater like it might come alive again. Then footsteps behind her, fast. She whirled, just in time to see Elise charging at her with a rusted metal pipe in hand. The blow connected with her shoulder, hard enough to knock Marion sideways into the wall. Her vision swam, but she didn't fall. She let the momentum spin her and came up swinging. Elise was lighter, faster, but Marion had spent decades training her body to withstand waves, weights, and weather. Her fist connected with Elise's ribcage, driving the wind from her lungs. Elise gasped, staggering backward. "Why?" Marion panted, gripping her bruised shoulder. "You could have just left." Elise's face contorted. "You don't understand. He was going to leave me. Take them with him. I wasn't going to disappear quietly." "So you killed him?" Marion asked, voice ragged. "In front of your daughters?" Elise's hands trembled, but her eyes didn't flinch. "I told them he slipped, that he didn't listen to me. They believed me. They're children, Elise. You think they won't remember? I gave them a chance to live," she snapped. "Everything I did, the cabin, the heater, the hiding, it was to protect them. I made sure they were fed, warm. I told them stories. I gave them stability after he tried to ruin everything." Marion's stomach twisted. "You're sick." "No," Elise said coldly. "I'm a mother, and I wasn't going to be replaced. Jonah had a lawyer, papers drawn. He was going to file for full custody, said I was unstable, that I wasn't fit." Marion's heart pounded. So that's what this was. Not a slip, not a panic, a calculated response to rejection. "You pushed him," she said, stepping between Elise and the door. "And now you're trying to clean up the rest. You were never supposed to find us," Elise said bitterly. "No one was. Ben wasn't supposed to show that video. He was supposed to help me." Marion felt the rage build in her throat. "You used him, just like you used Jonah, just like you're trying to control those girls." Elise's hand tightened around the pipe again. "Move. Not a chance." Outside, the wind howled harder. The shelter groaned under its weight, and a distant crack echoed, like rocks shifting under pressure. Time was running out. "You go through me," Marion said, steady and calm. "Or you go down for murder, attempted murder, and child endangerment. Either way, Elise, this ends now." Elise's face flickered. Rage, grief, desperation, colliding in real time. For a terrifying moment, Marion saw the decision playing out behind her eyes. Then Elise dropped the pipe. It clanged against the concrete floor and rolled into the shadows. Marion didn't let herself breathe until she had Elise's wrists cuffed with the zip ties from her pack. Hands behind her back, seated against the shelter wall. Ben returned moments later, cheeks wind-burned, arms empty. "The girls are safe," he said, tucked behind the ridge, far from the gas. "They're scared, but they're okay." Marion nodded. "Good. We need a call-out." Ben raised the satellite phone. "Already on it? Coast Guard's deploying a chopper. ETA 20. Marion stood over Elise, bruised but unbroken. "You won't see them again," she said quietly. "They're not yours to control anymore." Elise turned away, staring into the darkened shelter like it still held a future for her. Marion stepped outside into the fog, letting the cold wrap around her. On the rocks below, the tide had begun to retreat. And with it, perhaps, the last shadows of her brother's disappearance. The helicopter came in low, its rotors thumping across the cliffs like a distant war drum. The wind from its descent stirred up the fog, scattering it in curling bursts that revealed glimpses of the jagged terrain, the black slick cliffs, and the huddled group near the ledge. Marion stood a few feet from the girls, one hand lightly resting on Kala's shoulder as the Coast Guard rescue team touched down on the narrow plateau just above the shelter. The moment the doors opened, 2 medics jumped out with gear in hand. They moved fast and quiet, their efficiency a comfort to Marion's trained eye. The younger of the 2 crouched in front of Maisie, speaking in soft, practiced tones. The child stared at him silently for several seconds before glancing up at Marion. "It's okay," Marion said gently. "They're going to take you somewhere warm." "Will you come too?" Maisie asked, her voice barely audible. "I'll be right behind you," she promised. The medics nodded, understanding the weight of that exchange. Kala followed her sister up the ramp into the helicopter without a word, but she reached back to grab Marion's hand just before the doors began to close. Marion squeezed it once, then released. Then it was just her and Ben again. And Elise, cuffed and silent on the cold ground. The lead officer, a broad-shouldered woman with Coast Guard insignia on her collar, approached them, face wind-chapped and grave. "Ms. Rowe? I'm Commander Alvarez. We've got your statement from the radio, but we'll need a full debrief once you're back on base." "Understood," Marion replied. "She needs to be separated from the children. She tried to blow up the shelter with me inside. She's dangerous, calculated." "We've got her," Alvarez said, signaling to the pair of officers now hoisting Elise to her feet. "Attempted murder, obstruction, possibly more depending on what the children disclose." As Elise was led away, Marion turned her face toward the sea. It stretched endlessly, black and silver under the moonlight. Jonah had always loved this view. She remembered standing with him here as teenagers, watching storms roll in, making up stories about sea monsters and ghost ships and treasure buried beneath the cliffs. He had believed the ocean told the truth, that it always returned what didn't belong to it. Now, 3 weeks after his disappearance, Marion wanted to believe that too. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Ben asked beside her. "You don't have to be the one who finds him." Marion's jaw tightened. "Yes, I do." The second helicopter had arrived, this one carrying local investigators and Park Service divers. The cove beneath the shelter had only just become accessible with the receding tide. Alvarez had authorized a sweep, citing both public interest and the need to recover evidence or remains. Marion volunteered immediately. They descended with ropes and harnesses, the climb sharp and wet. The air smelled of decay and seaweed, and the waves crashed violently just beyond the narrow inlet. The shelter, now empty, loomed above them like a mouth closed on secrets. The water here was calmer than expected, too calm. And that's what made it strange. Ben stood on the rock ledge with binoculars, scanning the foam-churned pools below. One of the divers called out, voice tense, "Found something." Marion scrambled across the rocks as the diver emerged, his gloved hand gripping the edge of a tangled seaweed mat. As he pulled it back, the shape beneath revealed itself. Half buried in sand and kelp, a waterlogged backpack. Bright orange, torn strap, Jonah's pack. Marion dropped to her knees, her hand trembling as she reached for the zipper. Inside was soaked survival gear, a half-ruined map, and something wrapped in plastic. A wallet. Inside it, a photo of the twins, and a folded paper with a notary seal. Legal documentation, custody transfer papers. Backdated 2 weeks before their trip. Jonah had been serious. He wasn't bluffing. He had intended to protect the girls. He just hadn't gotten the chance. Ben crouched beside her. "There's more," he said softly, pointing toward a crevice in the rocks where the waves lapped too gently, like they'd been softened by something beneath. It took 2 divers to retrieve the body. It was him. Jonah Rowe, bloated, bruised, but unmistakable. His wedding ring still on his finger. His body lodged in the crevice, likely held in place by currents and rocks until the tides began to shift. Marion sat silently as they laid him on the rock shelf, covered with a thermal blanket. The noise around her faded, the radios, the chopper above, even Ben's voice as he tried to steady her. She reached out and touched her brother's hand. Cold, stiff, but still hers. "Hi, little brother," she whispered. "I'm sorry I took so long." Tears came silently. Not loud, not broken, just hot and constant as the ocean watched without comment. The body would be taken to the coroner. Autopsy. Reports. Closure. But nothing about this would ever be truly over. She stayed with him until the tide touched his boots again. Then she stood and looked up at the cliffside. Back to the shelter. Back to the lie Elise had built. And back to the girls who would need to understand the truth. Carefully, painfully, but fully. "I'm going to raise them, Jonah," she said aloud, like a vow spoken to the sea. "They're going to remember the best of you. Not her. Not this." She turned and climbed back up the rocks, toward the light, toward the sound of helicopter blades preparing for the final lift out, toward a future she hadn't planned, but one she was ready to carry. Marion stood at the foot of the hospital bed, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, watching the steady rise and fall of Kala's chest. The girl was asleep, curled onto her side, her fingers loosely wrapped around the edge of the blanket. Her breathing was shallow but even. Maisie lay in the bed beside her, one arm flung over her twin's back like she was trying to tether them both to the same dream. It had been 3 days since the rescue. 3 long, surreal days of interviews, statements, reports, and headlines. Elise Hart had been arrested the night of the extraction, charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder, obstruction of justice, and child endangerment. The media hadn't stopped calling since. But none of that was Marian's focus now. What kept her awake wasn't the public fallout or the legal circus beginning to form. It was the impossible question that had been gnawing at her from the moment she carried the girls into the ER. How do you explain to children that their mother tried to kill their father and almost killed you too? The room was dim. One of the nurses had installed a soft orange light in the corner, and someone had drawn a mural of sea creatures across the lower wall. It was meant to be comforting. It didn't help much. Marian hadn't left the hospital since their arrival. She had a cot in the adjoining room and a schedule with the nurses to ensure she was there whenever the girls woke up. They clung to her now, not out of confusion, but trust. They hadn't asked for Elise, not once. They hadn't asked what happened to Jonah either, not yet. And that, more than anything, scared Marian. "Miss Rowe?" a voice said gently from the door. She turned to see a tall man in a navy suit standing just outside the threshold, clipboard in hand. His expression was firm but not unkind. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to startle you." "Who are you with?" Marian asked, her tone clipped. "Family Court Services," he replied. "Name's Jordan Ellis. I'm the child advocate assigned to Maisie and Cala's emergency placement hearing." Marian's stomach tightened. "Already?" "It's standard in cases involving suspected abuse or homicide by a guardian," Ellis explained. "Given their father's passing and their mother's arrest, we're fast-tracking temporary custody review. We'll need to establish a primary caregiver until the criminal proceedings conclude." Marian nodded slowly. "And you're here to assess me?" "I'm here to talk," he said carefully. "I read the reports. You've taken care of them since the rescue. The staff here speaks highly of you, but the state has procedures. They're my nieces," Marian said quietly. "I don't want them in the system." Ellis stepped inside and gestured toward a small table near the window. Marian followed and sat across from him. "I understand," he said, "and I'm not here to make this adversarial, but I do need to ask questions. Background, employment, housing situation, medical history, criminal records, if any. I also need to assess your emotional stability." Marian nearly laughed at that. "I was dragged into a near explosion, got into a fistfight in a bomb shelter, helped recover my brother's body, and haven't slept more than 4 hours in a row since. You'll have to define stable." Ellis smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how often that's the case with trauma survivors." They talked for nearly an hour. Marian answered every question with the clipped precision of someone who'd spent decades giving safety briefings and leading survival teams. She explained her home setup: 2 bedrooms, safe neighborhood, close to the school district. She described her financial situation: modest but solid. She had a pension from the Coast Guard and some money saved from teaching rescue courses. Most importantly, she had no intention of letting the girls grow up anywhere but with her. When they were done, Ellis tucked his papers back into his briefcase. "I'll be recommending that you receive temporary custody," he said. "Assuming the judge agrees, you'll be their legal guardian pending the criminal trial and any further civil proceedings." "Thank you," Marian said, and meant it. He stood, then paused at the door. "One last thing. When you do talk to them about their parents, I'd recommend involving a child trauma therapist. The truth matters, but so does how you deliver it." Marian nodded. "I won't lie, but I won't destroy them either." Ellis gave her a small nod and left. After he was gone, Marian walked back to the bed. The girls hadn't stirred. The machines beeped softly in the background. She reached down and brushed a strand of hair from Maisie's cheek. The child sighed in her sleep and pressed closer to her sister. The door opened again. This time it was Ben. He looked worn, his coat dusted with mist from the outside. "How are they?" "Sleeping, for now." He hesitated. "I brought something." She raised an eyebrow as he stepped forward, holding a small, leather-bound journal. "Found it tucked into the lining of Jonah's pack," Ben explained. "Must have been keeping notes. I didn't read it. Thought you should decide what to do with it." Marian took the journal carefully. It was damp along the edges, but the ink inside was still legible. She opened to the first page. "August 3rd, Split Tooth Cove. Elise isn't herself. The girls notice it too. I've written the lawyer. If anything happens, Marian will know what to do. She closed the book, a cold shiver running through her spine. "I'll read the rest later," she said quietly. "Not tonight." Ben nodded, stepping back toward the door. "If you need anything." "I know," she said. "Thank you." After he left, Marian sank into the chair beside the bed. She set the journal on the table and looked out the window at the city beyond. The lights blurred slightly through the glass, like the whole world had gone soft around the edges. The girls would wake soon. There would be more questions, more healing, more pain. But at least now they had a chance. She wouldn't let Elise define them. She wouldn't let Jonah be forgotten. And she wouldn't let this become just another story, whispered by strangers in the fog. This was their story now, and Marian Rowe intended to see it told right. The hospital discharge papers were still warm when Marian loaded the girls into her SUV. Calla sat behind her, buckled in with quiet precision, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Maisie, curled up in the back seat, was already dozing again, her arms wrapped around her sea otter plush like it was the only thing left that made sense. Marian adjusted the mirror. "You two okay back there?" Calla nodded. "Can we go home now?" Home. Marian's throat tightened around the word. "Yeah," she said softly. "We're going home." The drive to her place took less than 30 minutes. Her cottage was small, a 2-bedroom place tucked behind a curtain of pine and alder, a 5-minute walk from the beach. Jonah had helped her rebuild the porch 2 years ago. She could still see him hammering boards in the sun, sweat on his neck, grinning like they were kids again. She pulled into the gravel driveway and let the engine idle for a moment. Maisie stirred, but didn't wake. "You want to carry her?" Marian asked Calla. The girl looked up. "Can you?" "I've carried bigger," Marian said with a small smile. "Besides, you get first pick of the bedrooms." That earned the faintest flicker of amusement from Calla, the first real spark Marian had seen since the rescue. Inside, the house smelled like cedar and lemon cleaner. Marian had cleaned it top to bottom the day before, not out of necessity, but nerves. She needed the girls to feel like this place was safe, like it had always been waiting for them. She laid Maisie on the smaller of the 2 beds in the guest room, covered her with a soft quilt, and left the door cracked just enough to hear if she stirred. Calla stood in the hallway, hands tucked into her sleeves. "You want to see your room?" She nodded. Marian led her down the hall and opened the second door. The room was painted a soft, pale green, calm and neutral. The dresser was empty, but the bookshelves had already been stocked. Marian had made a late-night run to the bookstore and grabbed every title she remembered them reading with Jonah. Some of them were probably too young for Calla now, but that didn't matter. Familiarity mattered. Calla walked in slowly, touching the edges of the bookshelf, trailing her fingers over the spines. "Do you want something different on the walls?" Marian asked. "We can paint. Pick a color, posters, whatever you want." Calla didn't answer. She turned, walking back to the bed, and sat down. "Do you think she meant to hurt us?" The question hit Marian harder than she expected. Calla looked up. Her expression wasn't angry, just tired. Too old for 8 years. "I heard her talking to herself sometimes, like she was making speeches. She said we had to start over, that people would understand once they saw what happened, that it had to look like an accident." Marian knelt beside the bed. "Calla, I'm not gonna lie to you. Your mom made choices, dangerous ones, and she hurt people. But you're safe now. That's what matters most." Calla nodded, but her gaze drifted away again. "I don't remember the fall, just that Dad went out and didn't come back." "Did your mom say what happened?" "She said the cliff crumbled under him, that she couldn't reach him in time, but she never let us look. She got really mad when I asked to go outside." Marian's jaw tightened. "That's not your fault." "None of it." "She told Maisie he left us," Calla whispered. "Said he didn't love us enough to stay." Marian felt the weight of that sentence settle on her chest like lead. "That's not true," she said fiercely. "Your dad loved you more than anything. He was trying to protect you. That's why you're here now." A beat passed. "Did he know she was going to do it?" "He suspected something," Marian admitted. "That's why he wrote those papers. He wanted to make sure you and Maisie would be okay, no matter what." Calla pulled her knees up to her chest. "I don't think I believe in okay anymore." Marian sat on the floor beside the bed, leaning back against the wall. "I didn't either. Not for a long time. I lost someone once, years ago, before Jonah had you. And I thought that was it, that my life had ended in the space between one breath and the next. Calla looked over. What happened? He was a rescue diver, Marion said softly. Like me, only faster, braver. One day he went in for a capsized boat. The current shifted. He never came back. Calla was silent for a long moment. Then, did it feel like the world forgot how to hold you? Marion swallowed the lump rising in her throat. Yeah, she said, exactly like that. They sat there in silence, the only sound the distant hush of wind through the pines. After a while, Calla slid off the bed and leaned against Marion's side. She didn't cry, Calla whispered. After Dad died, not even once. Marion didn't respond. She didn't need to. She just reached up and gently smoothed Calla's hair back from her face, pressing a kiss to her temple. I'm not her, she said, and I'll never lie to you. I'll never leave you. That's a promise. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. Inside, something old began to loosen, like a weight shifting off the beam of a house, a beginning wrapped inside the wreckage of an ending. And for the first time in weeks, Marion let herself believe. Maybe the girls weren't broken, just unfinished. And she could help them find the rest. The courthouse in Tillamook wasn't built for spectacle. A squat red brick building tucked between the post office and an abandoned bakery, it gave off the air of something worn and tired, a place where paperwork outlived people. Yet on the morning of Elise Hart's arraignment, it buzzed like a disturbed hive. Marion arrived early, wearing her dark coat and boots still dusted with pine needles. She hadn't brought the girls. Calla had nightmares the night before. Sweat-soaked sheets and muffled cries, and Maisie had clung to her all morning. There was no way she was putting them back in the same room as their mother. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Ben met her outside, leaning against the fender of his truck with his hands in his pockets. His face was pale, jaw tight. You don't have to go in, Marion said. I do, he replied. I need to hear her say it, out loud. I need to see the truth land on her shoulders like it's supposed to. Marion understood that. Grief needed witnesses, so did justice. Inside, the courtroom was cold, not from temperature but tension. There were reporters in the back, silent and sharp-eyed, pens already poised. The prosecutor sat at the long table near the judge's bench, surrounded by files and crime scene photos still hidden in folders. The bailiff looked bored. And then they brought Elise in. Her orange jumpsuit was too clean, too crisp. Her hair was pulled back into a tight braid, her face unreadable. She didn't look at Marion. Not once. Not even when the clerk read the charges. Murder in the first degree, attempted murder, 2 counts of child endangerment, obstruction of justice. Elise's attorney, a gray-suited woman with sharp cheekbones and tired eyes, entered a plea of not guilty. A murmur passed through the gallery. Marion stayed still, her hands folded on her lap, knuckles white. The judge, a man with a permanent squint and the weight of 40 years behind his gavel, didn't flinch. We'll set bail hearing for next week, he said. Pre-trial conference in 14 days. Miss Hart, you'll remain in custody until then. Elise spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed. Your Honor, I would like to request a no-contact order against my sister-in-law. She has made repeated false allegations against me, and I fear for my safety. Marion blinked, then laughed, sharp and bitter. The judge's eyes flicked up. Miss Rowe, I'll remind you this is a court of record. I apologize, she said, but I found that request ironic, considering she tied me to a chair in a gas-filled bunker. Elise's lawyer cleared her throat. We maintain that Miss Hart acted under extreme emotional distress following her husband's tragic death. Tragic? Marion snapped. She pushed him off a cliff, with their daughters watching. Enough, the judge said, voice hard. Miss Rowe, if you wish to testify, you'll do so through proper channels. Miss Hart will remain under full restriction pending psychiatric evaluation. The gavel came down with a wooden crack. Elise was led away. But for the first time she looked back, not at Marion, but at the reporters. And she smiled. Marion felt it like a chill along her spine. That wasn't the smile of a mother begging for understanding. It was the smile of someone playing a longer game. Ben exhaled next to her. She's not done. No, Marion said, but neither am I. Outside, the crowd began to break. Reporters rushed forward, but Marion kept walking, her coat drawn tight. A voice called her name, female, soft, hesitant. She turned. A woman in her late 30s stood holding a notepad, tall, lean, with freckles and a camera crew 10 feet behind her. "Ms. Rowe, I'm with the Ledger. We're running a feature on the case. Would you be willing to speak on record?" Marion stared at her. "Why?" "Because people are already rewriting it," the reporter said. "Online forums, true crime blogs, they're saying Elise was coerced, that your brother was abusive, that this is some twisted custody battle gone wrong." Marion's mouth opened, then closed. "Not asking you to speak today," the woman continued, "but I'd like to hear your version. The girl's story, not the one Elise left behind." Marion glanced toward the courthouse. Elise was already gone, swallowed into the system. "Maybe," she said finally, "but not yet." The reporter nodded, slipping her card into Marion's hand. Back at the house, Calla was in the backyard, barefoot in the damp grass, arranging seashells on the porch like runes. Marion joined her, lowering herself to the steps. "You okay?" she asked. Calla nodded, not looking up. "Maisie's building a fort in the closet. She said it's safer in the dark." "And you?" Calla laid down another shell. "I remember everything," she said. "Not just what happened, but before. The way Dad used to hum when he cooked breakfast, the way Mom used to braid our hair too tight, the night she told us not to cry, that if we were brave, she'd make it all better." Marion's heart ached. "And did she?" "No," Calla said. "She made it worse." Marion reached over, gently touched her hand. "You don't have to remember it all at once." "I don't want to forget either." "You won't," Marion promised, "but we'll carry it together." For the first time in days, Calla leaned against her, and Marion held her. Not like a protector, not like a survivor, but like someone building something new out of the wreckage, something the tide couldn't wash away. Marion had always imagined healing would be slow, like fog lifting at dawn, like frost melting in spring. But that was before the fire. It began the night the girls asked to light candles on the beach. A quiet ritual Marion didn't have the heart to deny. Maisie had whispered that she wanted to say goodbye to her dad with the stars watching. So Marion brought them to the same patch of sand where Jonah used to fish, the one where his old folding chair still sat collecting dust in her garage. They arranged a circle of driftwood and seashells, their candles flickering in the salty wind while the surf roared beyond. Calla stood beside Marion, silent and steady, holding her candle like it contained something sacred. Something she wasn't ready to let go of, but needed to release anyway. Then Maisie asked, "Can we burn something too? Like in the movies?" Marion hesitated, then nodded, "As long as it's safe." Maisie pulled a folded sheet of paper from her coat pocket. It was a drawing. Elise, Jonah, and the twins. Bright crayon colors, but the lines were jagged, the faces wrong. "I want her to go away," Maisie said. "Not just from us, from my head." Marion struck the match. The fire flared, then softened. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished. She didn't stop her. The next morning, the call came. There had been a fire at the county jail where Elise was being held. Not an accident. Another inmate had started it. Rumors were already swirling. Someone claimed Elise had been bragging about hidden money, making deals, planning something even bigger than what she'd already done. The fire was contained. Elise survived. Barely. Unconscious, pulled from her cell by guards, smoke in her lungs, burns across her shoulder and down one arm. Marion sat in her truck outside the hospital, staring through the windshield at nothing. She hadn't told the girls. Ben appeared without a word, slipping into the passenger seat beside her. "You heard?" "Yeah." "She's in ICU. No visitors." "Good." They sat in silence for a long stretch of minutes. "You okay?" he asked finally. "No," Marion said. "But I don't need to be. I just need to be ready." After a pause, she added, "What if this was part of her plan? What if it's just another performance?" Ben shook his head. "Then it won't work. Too many people know the truth now." Her lawyer dropped her. "The DA's pushing for psychological evaluation, but even if she tries to plead insanity, she's not getting near those girls again." Marion looked away. "She already is. Every time Maisie flinches in her sleep, every time Calla freezes when she sees a mother yelling at her kid in the grocery store. You're doing everything you can." "It's not enough." Ben turned to face her. "Then let me help. You don't have to be everything for them." She blinked. "You mean us?" He didn't flinch. "You think I stayed away because I didn't care? I was afraid of her, and I hate that I let that fear win. You're here now, and I'm not going anywhere." It wasn't a love confession. It wasn't some sweeping promise. It was a decision, quiet, certain. That night, Marian found the girls curled up by the fireplace. Maisie was asleep, tucked into a blanket, clutching her stuffed otter. Calla was still awake, drawing in her notebook. "What are you working on?" Marian asked. Calla hesitated, then turned the page toward her. A drawing of a woman on a cliff, windswept, small but solid. 2 little girls stood beside her. The ocean rolled beneath them, endless and strong. "You," Calla said. Marian sat down beside her. "Thank you? She's gone, isn't she?" Calla asked softly. "She's alive," Marian answered gently. "But she'll never hurt you again." Calla didn't respond right away. Then, okay. Not forgiveness, not trust, but maybe, just maybe, the first stone in a new foundation. That night, Marian sat beside the fire long after the girls had fallen asleep, watching the flames rise and fade. There had been fire on the water, fire in the jail, fire in her chest every time she imagined Jonah's final breath. But fire didn't just destroy. Sometimes it made room for something new. Rain fell hard on the roof of the county courthouse, drumming like a warning no one could ignore. Marian stood just inside the main entrance, watching rivulets of water race down the window glass. Her coat was soaked at the collar, her boots trailing mud from the walk across the parking lot. She barely felt it. All she could feel was the weight in her chest. Today was Calla's testimony. It wasn't a full criminal trial. That would come later. But it was a crucial hearing. A statement under oath, part of the custody process, and a pivotal piece of Elise's coming prosecution. Marian had resisted it at first. Calla was only 8. She had already seen too much. But the girl had been clear, her voice unwavering. "She lied," Calla said. "I want people to know what really happened." Marian couldn't say no to that. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than she expected. Pale walls, oak trim, no press allowed, just a few officials, the judge, Elise's public defender, and a monitor where Elise would appear via video link from her hospital room. She wasn't well enough to attend in person. Burns still healing, reputation in shambles, but the court still required her presence. Calla sat on the bench outside the hearing room with a court therapist, her small hands folded in her lap, her legs swinging just above the floor. She was dressed in a navy sweater and jeans, her hair brushed and pinned back the way Jonah used to do it. Marian sat across from her, trying not to look as nervous as she felt. Ben hovered near the doorway, arms crossed. "She's got this," he murmured, as if saying it aloud would make it true. When the bailiff opened the door and nodded, Calla stood up on her own. No hesitation, no glance backward. Marian followed her inside and took a seat just behind the witness stand. She didn't speak, didn't move, just let her presence be enough. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and a lined face, looked at Calla kindly. "Miss Whitaker, do you know why you're here today?" Calla nodded. "To tell the truth. And you understand this is about what happened in the mountains?" "Yes. Do you feel ready?" "I do." The judge gave a small nod. "Go ahead." Calla looked toward the monitor. Elise's face flickered into view, pale, expressionless, bandages visible around her collarbone. She said nothing, just stared. Calla's voice was soft but clear. "She told people my dad slipped, that it was an accident, but it wasn't." Marian held her breath. Calla continued. "I saw her. She pushed him. He was trying to get help. She got mad. She said he wasn't going to ruin things." The courtroom stilled. The judge's brow furrowed slightly. "And you're certain of what you saw?" "Yes, she told Maisie and me not to cry, said no one would believe kids anyway." Elise's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, I object to this testimony being used for anything beyond preliminary assessment. The witness is underage, and her memory may be influenced by trauma." The judge raised her hand. "She's providing a statement under oath. It will be assessed in full context. Please sit down." The lawyer obeyed, clearly uncomfortable. "Calla," the judge said gently, "did your mother ever say anything about your aunt?" Calla hesitated. "She said Aunt Marian was trying to take us away, that she hated us, that if we left with her, we'd never be safe again." The lie hung in the room like smoke. Marian swallowed hard. Calla was trembling now, her hands gripping the edge of the seat. "She tied up Aunt Marian in the cabin," Calla said, "and she left Wren in the snow. Said it was a test." The judge didn't speak for a long moment. Then she turned to the court officer and said, Please mark this statement for the record in full. I am issuing a permanent no-contact order between Elise Hart and her children, effective immediately. Elise didn't flinch, but the corner of her mouth twitched, barely. As of this moment, the judge continued, full legal custody of Calla and Maisie Whitaker is granted to Marion Rowe. Marion stood. Her knees nearly buckled with relief. She crossed the room to Calla and dropped to one knee. "You were so brave," she whispered, wrapping the girl in her arms. Calla didn't answer, but she didn't let go either. Outside, the rain had softened to a steady whisper. Ben waited on the courthouse steps with an umbrella in one hand and 2 hot chocolates in the other. "She okay?" he asked. "She will be," Marion said, wrapping her arm around Calla's shoulders. As they stepped into the mist, Marion looked back just once, at the window where Elise's image had flickered. And she felt no fear, only purpose. The truth had been spoken. Now it was time to build something stronger with it. Something lasting. Something that would hold. The ocean looked different now. Marion stood at the edge of the bluff, the morning wind whipping through her coat. Below, the sea crashed in a steady rhythm, no less wild than before, but no longer threatening. Just alive. Just real. Just there. Behind her, the cottage window glowed with soft light. Calla was inside, helping Maisie build a castle out of couch cushions and cardboard. It had towers. It had a moat made of blue blankets. It had rules that only they understood. It had walls. But they weren't to keep people out. They were to keep something in, something sacred. It had been 2 weeks since the court hearing. 2 weeks since Marion had signed the final custody papers. 2 weeks of trying to learn how to be the center of a storm's aftermath. Not just a rescuer, not just a survivor. A guardian. She was still learning. The girls had started school quietly, gently. A small class down the road with a teacher Marion trusted, who understood what it meant to give space without stepping away. Calla sat near the windows. Maisie liked to sit near the teacher's desk. They didn't say much to the other kids, but they started bringing home drawings again. They were always of 3 people. Sometimes a sea otter. Always a sunrise. Ben came by more often. Never pushing, never asking for more than Marion could give. Sometimes he'd bring groceries. Sometimes just coffee. Sometimes just himself. He fixed the loose board on the porch last week without being asked. "I don't want to be another person who makes promises he can't keep," he'd said. "You're not," Marion replied, and she'd meant it. One morning, while folding laundry, Marion found a crumpled envelope tucked into the pocket of Maisie's jeans. Inside was a drawing. Elise, in black crayon, standing alone on a jagged rock. Her face was blank. Above her, 2 birds flew toward the sun. Marion didn't ask about it. She burned it in the fireplace after the girls went to bed. Some memories needed to be folded into ash. Later that week, a letter arrived. Official. Heavy paper. No return address. But Marion knew the handwriting. Elise. She didn't open it. She held it over the sink, tore it down the middle, and watched the water carry the pieces away. That night, when Calla asked, "Do you think she still thinks about us?" Marion didn't lie. "Yes, but it doesn't matter what she thinks, only what you do." Maisie added, "We think about Daddy. Every day," Marion said, "and we always will." That night, they lit 3 candles, one for Jonah, one for what they had lost, one for what they were still building. Weeks turned into months. Spring came to the coast, timid and soft. Daffodils opened behind the cottage. The sea became less gray, more blue. The girls began laughing more. Calla joined a library reading club. Maisie learned to ride a bike, with training wheels, squealing through puddles until her socks were soaked and her cheeks red with wind. And Marion slowly began to breathe again. She never forgot what happened. Never would. But she also knew this. Some endings are really just a clearing. A burning down of what once was, to make room for what can be. And in that space, something grew. Not perfect, but whole and home. The ocean still roared. The wind still whispered. But now, when Marion listened, it didn't sound like warning, it sounded like a promise.